maybe some of you can say why you came here tonight. Who would like to volunteer? You start. Okay, you start.
I came here because you're here.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. It means a lot to me. And I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my spiritual master's very deliberate plan to bring me and others like me to a higher stage of life. He saw potential in everyone because the soul can rise in due course of time from any situation. In fact, there's a way in which the soul never actually mixes with the material nature. Asango hyayam purushaha. Sango means to connect, and asango means there's no connection. Nevertheless, because the soul is small, we can be waylaid as a pedestrian is waylaid when walking in fog and lose his or her way. Souls without protection and shelter can lose their way. However, we're so close to Krishna. In fact, we're never separated from him. And we want everything that Krishna has, and we're not getting it. So when a great soul, Srila Prabhupada, deliberately shows Krishna to others, then they may immediately respond by waking up to their own potential. And that's what happened with me. And that's why I'm here tonight. Because Krishna consciousness was the most attractive thing I'd ever seen in my life when it was presented to me in a magazine. And then, because there was a deliberate system that I could enter into, a society and a group where they'd let me live. I couldn't believe they let me in the door. I still wonder at that. And I really appreciate the compassion that Srila Prabhupada and then all his followers have had. All of you are doing the same thing here. Those of you who run this center, you're allowing for all of us to come here and awaken our potential full Krishna consciousness. So thank you. Thank you for coming here. Association is so important, actually. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Purusha prakritisto hi bhunkte prakriti jan gunan karanam gunasangosya sarasad yoni janmasu. If you want to know how you got to where you are today, Krishna says, basically, paraphrasing, just check out who you've associated yourself with in the past and who you're associating yourself with now, because the kind of energy that we are, which is spiritual, but we are also called tatasta, which means that we're open to suggestion. And any kind of suggestion we get goes in, and eventually it can take us on a certain course. So those in any discipline who are cultivating a certain talent or type of consciousness normally try to associate with those who have that talent or level of consciousness. And Krishna consciousness is very much like that. When there's association of those who are awakened in Krishna consciousness, and we have that, that's how we get to where we are. And that's the most important part of it. So thank you for your association tonight. One other person want to say why you came here tonight? Yes? But it better be different from what he said.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
Always
Thank you.
I came to know about your 4 questions. why you ask why do you open the mouth for everyone, and how does that relate to us or to myself as a human being?
So you heard about a book? Yeah, okay. Thank you for coming to hear about the book. Does anybody have a question? Neelaji? Yes?
I would like to know what the 4 answers are.
The 4 answers. That's the next book called The 4 Answers. What are the 4 answers? Well, in a play on words, when I was writing the book, and I don't know if it ended up in the book or not, but I like to say questions are the answer. And I point out, as was a realization I had from looking at language, I like to look at language. I like to look at the history of words, and I'm particularly interested in how language works, and also punctuation marks. And one of my conclusions in looking at the English language, or any other language for that matter, is that the punctuation mark, no, don't use those too often. You can't use it more than one time in an essay. The question mark is the most powerful punctuation mark. I thought I was saying exclamation mark. That's why you didn't react. I misspoke. The most powerful of all punctuation marks is the question mark. Consider that if you write to somebody, you can write a long novella-like email, and if you don't put a question mark in it, they don't have to answer you. But if there's one question mark, then they'll feel compelled to answer. What compels it is that symbol, which I started thinking of in different ways, that it's kind of like a hook, because rhetoricians also say that whoever's asking the questions is leading the conversation. And oftentimes when I don't know what to answer someone, I come back to that advice. I read it in a book called How to Win an Argument by a professor from New York University, and he pointed out about that power in conversation of asking questions and leading things in a certain direction. Have you ever been presented with a problem, somebody writes you or speaks to you and you're not sure how to answer? Well, that happens to me all the time, and then I remember that I should ask a question instead of trying to answer something that I really don't have a grasp of yet. In that case, I think of the question mark as being like a tennis racket. If you think of it, you could string the tennis racket a little bit and it hit back. If they ask me a question that I can't answer, I just hit it back. For instance, it's like, how do you mean that? Or what do you mean by, and I ask what their definition or their conception of a certain word is. And then when they answer, oftentimes it's in a much better form, so I understand their intention, so then I can answer. Notice the power of the question mark in that way. And questions, or the question, is mentioned at the outset of the most important book that summarizes all of the Upanishads and the Vedas. Of course, the Upanishads are a section of entire work of knowledge called the Vedas that talk about all the aspects of our lives, but there's a part in which the Upanishads, Upanishad means to sit up close, because you've decided that there's no way you're going to get comfortable in the material world, no matter how much information or good facility you have for that, and then you want to sit up close to a teacher to find out what's beyond all that. Upanishad means sit close, listen carefully, lean in. And then there's a summary of all those in what's called the Brahma Sutras. And the first aphorism, and aphorism means they're written in code for smart people to unpack later. And many highly elevated spiritualists have given extensive commentary on these codes or aphorisms, short sentences that are packed with meaning. One of the commentaries, for those of you who weren't aware of this progression through the Vedas to the modern age, is the Srimad Bhagavatam. It's a commentary on the Vedanta Sutra. And what is the first aphorism in the Vedanta Sutra? It's the admonition to all of us to ask a question. But it says, Atato Brahma Jignasa, has this implication that starts off Atato, which means therefore. And the implication of that is that, therefore, because you've tried everything else and it didn't work. Therefore, because you've been in many situations, including various species of life, since before a time we can remember, we've been in a process called samsara, transferring practically aimlessly. Although the material nature is not random, it's very purposeful and accommodating, but my purpose may not be strong enough, and I may have a superficial understanding of who I am, and therefore I'm accommodated as such and given a material body, which is practically by definition superficial. And then it says, Atato Brahma. Brahma means the greatest thing. Or the implication is, and it's given definition of what Brahma is, or God, or our source, is Janmadhyasaya Taha, in a subsequent aphorism, which is that from whom everything else emanates. The source of everything, the source of you. Ask about that, as in, where did I come from? And dare we ask, why do I have to die? These types of questions. It invites us to be bold in asking really big questions. Gives us permission. It's basically saying, don't be afraid to ask big questions. Because the idea is the answers will be forthcoming. And that's the magic of asking questions. First, in a simplistic way, if you don't ask, you don't get, right? You never know till you ask, and it's like, well, you said yes. And there's a way that the Brahma Sutras are saying, if you ask, the answers will come. There's also, in other scriptures of the world, the sense of, if you knock, if you're bold enough to knock or ask, then the question will be answered. But how? In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Tesham evanukam partham aham jnana jamdamaha nashayam yatma bhavasto jnana dipena bhasvata. He said, I live in your heart. Who's Krishna? He's the one who knows everything. He's also our best friend. And if you ask, who am I? Why do I have to die? What's this universe for? In the verse, he says, I'll illuminate your heart from within. And he gives the metaphor of a lamp. It's just as if he's going to light a lamp in your heart and show you the way. Even if you don't have any other facility, if you have a question, you can open the universe to all of the secrets that are hidden. And that all comes from asking a question. So the first question is, that I suggested in the book, is to ask, what is my purpose? I tell the story of two disciples of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Rupa and Sanatan, who had an opulent lifestyle. They were well compensated for their work. They were extremely wealthy and respected in the society they were in. But they weren't satisfied, and they were looking for answers. They met Chaitanya Mahaprabhu nearby where their employment was, and when they approached him, they asked very basic questions, but they were basic but really big and important questions. For instance, even though they were so highly educated, they said, Sanatana Goswami said, "Who am I?" Everyone says I'm learned, but I don't even know who I am, really. And if we think about our situation, which is also mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam, that in an allegory that is told to a king, about a story about a man who's looking all over the universe to find out a place where he can enjoy. And he looks in every area of the universe, and he finally sees in Bharatvarsha, on this earth planet, a beautiful setting, park, and he goes there and he sees a beautiful woman, and then, as usual, the plot thickens. And then he starts to converse with her, and said, he says to her, "Where did you come from?" And she said, "I don't know. And nor do I know where I'm going. All I know is I'm right here, right now." And so we barely have an inkling of where we're going or how we even got here. So when we can start with the ways in which the great teachers like Sanatana Goswami and Rupa Goswami started by asking, "Who am I?" And Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gave a simple answer. It said, "You're an eternal servant of Krishna." That's one of the answers. So, first of all, the first question is, what is my purpose? And there are ways in which we can do many things without knowing what their purpose is. And to that end, I included a story that I heard a long time ago that resonated with me. Not only that, it tickled me, so I like the story, and also there's a phrase that goes along with it that will become obvious when I tell the story. And the story is that there was a priest, and he was teaching his followers how to perform a complicated wedding ceremony. And in the practice sessions that he was doing, there was a cat who kept getting in through a window that wouldn't quite shut tightly enough to keep the cat out. And man, being a cat lover himself, decided that the way he would handle it would, he'd get a bowl of milk and pacify the cat. The cat drank the milk, and then he petted the cat, and he got a little basket, and he put the cat in the basket, and it went to sleep. And meanwhile, all the students were, of course, writing everything down. And some years later, when the priest had passed on, and his acolytes were to follow in his footsteps, and they were getting ready for a marriage ceremony. And they were kind of working together so they could coordinate everything. And one of them had all the notes. And then they were getting close to getting everything ready to go. And then one of them said, "Wait, hold it. We can't start. We're missing the cat in the basket." And they went and found a cat. They brought him in, gave him some milk, petted the cat, fell asleep, put it in the basket, so now we can start. And generations went by, and the cat in the basket had to be there. I know one of my friends and I, who frequented many temples in India, was like, "Why are they doing that?" And the cat in the basket. Or whatever it may be, from any tradition, there's a way in which we may not know the purpose behind something. In spiritual practice, there's a term for this, niyamagraha. There's a way in which you might do something but not be aware of why you're doing it. You just do it. And actually, the author of the book that included that phrase, Rupa Goswami, he was one of the ones who went to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He's giving basic advice about how to be in an effective spiritual practice, and he said, be very purposeful. Find out why you're doing this. And a practice that I took up a while back that's been very helpful in being purposeful was to take some time alone and to, on a legal pad, I recommend a legal pad because it gives you a sense that you have more space and that it's an important task. Writing everything down. And a pen. It's a visceral experience writing it down. But what are my priorities at the top, and just start thinking about what's most important to you. And then list it. And then reorder it. And there's a kind of stimulation that we get from knowing where we're going and knowing why we're doing things and what our main priorities are. And when I started writing those down, I thought a lot about the purpose of life. It can be lost. Socrates said, the unexamined life is not worth living. And is it possible, I thought to myself, to not examine my life one day, or 2 days, or a week, or a month, or a year, or 10 years? 10 years can go by and it's like, why did I do whatever I'm doing? Because I had to. Or a whole lifetime can go by. And I found an author who was a hospice nurse, and she talked to a lot of people before they were leaving the world, and they had this epiphany, oftentimes, many of them had, that they hadn't really thought about what was most important to them. They were carried along by the routine and by the cats in the baskets in their lives, and they never were able to boldly, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna Maharaj. It's so good to see you. Thank you for coming. We're talking about we're just discussing some of the things I wrote in this book. And where was I?
Purpose.
Oh yeah, taking time to write down what are priorities. And that yes, and I found there was a hospice nurse, I mentioned her in the book, where she had this experience again and again when people near the end of their life, they had a epiphany where they were thinking of what they really thought was important and how they never got around to it. That was something very important to her, so she documented a lot of those and pointed out that it's better to be preemptive and start thinking about it a little earlier so you can be purposeful in your life. And not many people do take the time to ask what's the purpose. The second question that I wrote about for myself mostly is, how may I be of service? And when Sanatana Goswami asked Lord Chaitanya, who am I? He said, you're an eternal servant of Krishna. And Prabhupada tells a story about service. He tells the story of a tiny screw. And he said, if you find a tiny screw on the ground, you won't be able to, he doesn't say this, but you can't sell it on eBay. It's not worth anything. But if it's connected to the machine for which it was made, it's extremely valuable because it's connected to its purpose and it's doing some service. And Lord Chaitanya said, we're like that. When we're estranged from serving Krishna, we'll serve anyway because it's our nature, but we won't feel satisfied. Our service will feel disconnected. And in thinking about this sort of technology of asking questions, let's think of it as a switch you can flip, or even a modem through which you can connect to Krishna or to your you can raise your consciousness very quickly. And this morning, in talking about this very principle and this very question, I gave a very commonplace example. It's something that I've experienced before, and perhaps some of you may have also. Have you ever been to a social gathering that seemed awkward?
Yes.
I find all the time, in fact, I used to do some service in airports, and oftentimes I meet and greet people when they're on their way home for Thanksgiving. And so many people expressed anxiety. Why anxiety? Well, they're going home to their family, and that can be awkward. As what do you say? Maybe you're out of step, or your lifestyle's different, or there's somebody who's a braggart in the house, or whatever it may be. People are complicated, right? Or is it just me? And there are other gatherings we may go to where you're not sure, am I overdressed, underdressed? Am I the odd person out here? And it's hard to know how to fit in exactly when you get to some place. Is this any of this resonating?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm not a complete oddball. So, as I said, this is very commonplace, not lofty philosophical, but it leads to something that's perhaps helpful, and it goes along with the idea of the question, how may I be of service? So let's say I've gone to a place where I'm not really sure how I fit in exactly. I was invited, and I get there, people are talking, I don't know anybody, and I might think, oh, maybe I'll talk to the doorman, or whatever the situation may be. And then let's say a time, if I see somebody who looks like they're engaged there in service, they're doing something, and I go over and say, can I be of help? Can I serve? They say, yeah, sure. Why don't you move those chairs from here over to there? And then suddenly, I'm in a completely different category in that social gathering. I'm an insider. I'm the one moving the chairs. And the other people coming is like, oh yeah, you're part of the thing, right? Yeah, I move chairs. That's what I do. You know, I am part of this. I went from being an outsider to an insider in how may I be of service, in 6 words. And so what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was saying was this whole universe can feel awkward. But if I'm able to ask this question, how may I be of service, it's instantly aligning. It aligns me to my actual nature, and we call this dharma. Dharma is that which sustains something, that sustains us. And as it turns out in the teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and other parts of the scripture like the Bhagavad Gita, this is perfectly reasonable because that's where we fit. Like the little screw, when it's in the machine, it's glorious. It's doing something that is inestimably valuable. And so when we can ask, how may I be of service, and we can gain some service, then not only do we feel satisfied, but our life becomes productive and, I may even say, glorious. And so what's glorious about being servile or being a servant, or even the word actually comes, if you trace it back, from the word slave. Well, if you're connected in the right place and you're doing the right service to some for a great cause or serving a great person, then you also become great. The servant of what's a better position? Prabhupada used to ask this question: a king or the king's assistant? Like, it's really hard being a king. Don't try that. It's a bad gig. Everyone wants to kill you, and you know the food's rich every day. You can't catch a break. So, if you're the servant, though, you know you're glorious because you're with him, and you're serving the king, and you can live in your own simple way, and that's a very a principle that can be easily missed because there's so much emphasis on how to be the master, and there's a sense in which I think if I can't control a situation, then I should try harder to assert myself, but that oftentimes creates more tension. But if I think, I ask the question, how may I be of service? In fact, it can work in any awkward situation if I ask that question. How, in this particular situation that I'm in right now, giving a hypothetical, if I ask the question, how may I serve this situation in the best possible way, then we move our egos out of the way, that I have to control it, or I have to come up with the solution for it. And in the Gita, Krishna, when he's talking about fundamentals of spiritual life, he gives this advice, nirmana moha jita sanga dosha. Man means the sense of being the controller. As we say sometimes in Americanism, I'm the man, or you're the man. Have you heard that one before?
Yeah.
Or you be the man, however you say it. And then he says, nirman, don't be the man. Be the servant. Instead of trying to put yourself in the center, ask, how may I be of service? So that's the second question that one may ask. I've also thought about where do you get service? And oftentimes you get it from somebody who already has it. Someone who's already well established as a good servant and who has a reputation for being a good servant often needs help. And if you go to somebody, especially let's say in a spiritual organization like this, you find someone who already has been bequeathed service. That is, they've been given an opportunity to do something that's valuable. And you can say, do you need any help? Can I help out in any possible way? And I've observed that even the tiniest service, if you stick to it, it often grows and becomes part of your life's portfolio that's most meaningful, is how you've served. So that's the second question. I'm just giving a quick overview, and to answer your question, some of the answers, if that's what they are. The third question out of 4 is what is the lesson? This is a harder question to answer sometimes because life is often, frequently, painful. We go through agonizing situations in life, in relationships, love lost, or someone we love dies, or somehow or other we've been mistreated. And it can be such an assault on our sense of who we are and what should be in life that it can go right to the heart, and it can be extremely troubling. So I don't mean to make light of this question. I realize in my own life and the lives of others that life can be extremely painful, and trauma is very difficult to overcome. So I'm not trying to be glib by offering this question. But it is a universal principle, as mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam, in the verse many of you probably know from the 10th canto, 14th chapter, 8th verse, 10:14:8, for those who are keeping score here or at home. Tatenu kampam susamikshamano bunjana evatma kritam vipakam. This is a prayer by Lord Brahma, who is the first created being and the first one to offer to pass down knowledge that he got from Krishna directly. And he says in this prayer, if you situate yourself in such a way that you can see the universe as a cosmic schoolhouse, everything is meant for teaching me something, and so that I can improve myself. If I take it like that, then I take whatever happens to me as a way to learn something and valuable. We may not see it at first, but if we're able to ask the question, we avoid the default question, which is, why me? And this leads to a sense of victimhood, which takes a long time to come out of. A lot of coaching and help and so forth. But if we're able to, in the moment, deal with whatever happens to us by asking the question, what's this meant to teach me? It profoundly changes the way we interact with the world. This is Self-Help 101, isn't it? Say yes.
Yes.
And I'll explain why. Because a person on the planet in any book, recording, lecture will say this next phrase, which is, it's not what happens to you. It's what you do about what happens to you. And the essence of that is, what is the lesson? And I once heard in an interview, I was listening to this very intelligent and interesting person discussing with an interviewer who's pretty good at interviewing on National Public Radio. And during the course of the conversation, the interviewer had questioned a phrase or a name. The person was from Oklahoma who was being interviewed, and he called himself an Okie. And that's not, if you call somebody an Okie, it may be offensive. At least that's what the interviewer thought. So he said, oh, wait a minute, can you say that? You shouldn't say Okie. And he said, well, I am an Okie. But then he caught himself and he said, I live to be corrected. And then he went on and said, I'm a person from Oklahoma. I pulled over the car, I pulled out my notebook, and I wrote it down. I said, that's my mantra. I live to be corrected. And it's hard to say, don't you think?
Yeah.
Yeah? I mean, if you have a spouse, anybody here have a spouse? Only one person, huh? Okay. Try and see if you can say it to your spouse. Well, thank you. Thank you for giving me free advice. I live to be corrected. Now, of course, again, as a disclaimer, I'm not saying we should become a doormat for everyone and allow people to tread on us. But if we have this curiosity about our lives and we look at the world as a place for purification and to learn a lesson in everything that happens to us, we could rise to a level where we have an enlightened engagement with the world and with other people. I heard a commencement speech by Steve Jobs at Stanford. Have you ever heard that?
Yeah.
It's quite profound in the principle that he expresses there, and that was that the most trying times in his life were the ones in which he grew the most, and he came to a better understanding himself in life. As an example, he started a company out of a sense of wonderment. It wasn't really about making money. It was more about how he could do something that no one else had really done or thought of, and he had some vision for it, which is get a personal computer going. And he started in an innocent way, but with vigor. And it turned out to be successful. Moderately, right? Yeah? A little bit. And at a certain point in the development of this company, Apple, he had hired a new CEO who came into the company and subsequently, along with the rest of the board of directors, kicked Steve Jobs out of his own company. How do you think that feels? Really nice, right? I mean, it's hard giving up your whatever position you have and a sense of, having a chip in the game somewhere and being the controller. It's really hard to give up. In fact, there's a social psychologist, his name Michel, who said that there's this phenomena. They're called Michel's iron laws of oligarchy. He said that one of the asocial phenomena is that when people get in power, after they get in power, they spend most of their energy trying to stay in power rather than carry out the good purpose for which they started it, because the power is so enticing. So it becomes a very difficult proposition. And now I looped around some of these.
Steve Jobs.
Yeah, so Steve Jobs, thank you. Stay right in that seat there. So Steve Jobs said after he was kicked out of his own company, he reinvented himself. It was so dire that he had to be self-searching, and he thought, why did I start this in the first place? And then he thought back to his time at Reed College, which is a liberal arts college all the way. And he just sort of dabbled there, but he was really interested in creativity, and he took a class on fonts. And he thought, well, why can't computers do this? That was one of his main impetus for creating the personal computer. I'll create one with fonts. It was a very creative idea. And he then felt free at that time, because he had been taken out of the position of power that he was in, to start over and actually do what he wanted to. And he was even more successful the next time. Pixar came up, and that was bigger than Apple at the time. And then he talks about another instance in his life where he was misdiagnosed. He was told that he only had a couple of months to live for the condition that he had. And then a few days later, the doctor said, not, actually, it's a different variety of the ailment that you have, and we'll be able to treat it and you can live. But he said in the interim, between when he heard that he was going to die very soon and the time he was informed that he wasn't, he was able to gather himself and think, what is my ultimate purpose in life? And he learned such a lesson from that. How many lessons do I pass up at every second because of my false ego? I know when I'm talking to somebody, I have to check myself, because I know they're talking. Because now don't try to say, I already know that. Plus, I got one better than that. I can say something better than what you're saying right now. And because of the chatter in my mind, I'm missing what the other person's saying. So Mahatma Dāsa Prabhu, the great devotee, Mahatma, some people might know, he's a great saintly person walking the planet. He has this saying that there are 4 little words that block all learning. I already know that. And instead of taking the lesson and starting with a fresh mind and thinking, I don't know anything, which is the way that Sanatana Goswami approached Lord Chaitanya. He said, I don't even know who I am. Let's start there. Start at the beginning. How can I learn? I can learn from everything. And we find in the Bhagavatam also this sense of learning from our environment. There's the Avaduta Brahmana story in the 11th canto that Krishna tells to Uddhava when he says that Maharaj Yadu, when he was traveling in the wilderness, met this enlightened sage. And in their conversation, he was curious, how did you become enlightened? He said, all my gurus are here. Where? You're in the wilderness. And he started pointing to natural phenomena, like there's the mountain. It has taught me that if you hold forth even in the face of provocation and continue doing your duty like the mountain, it keeps giving water and minerals. And then he said, there's the tree, tolerance. It shows how to serve everybody else, and meanwhile, even if somebody cuts you down, no complaint. And he went on with 24 instances in life, not all natural phenomena. Some of them were scenes that he saw, like a person making an arrow, and he missed that the king had gone by with his retinue because he was so focused. So he said, I learned focus from that. I saw a Karari hawk one day. It was rising in the sky with a mouse, and then 2 bigger hawks assailed it and said, 2 choices, give up the mouse or fight and die. So he just dropped the mouse. Lesson in how to let go of things. I told that story once at one of the corporations in Silicon Valley that I speak at sometimes. And the next time I came back, there were a group of people waiting for the next talk, and as soon as I walked in, they said, drop the mouse. It was the drop the mouse movement. And so the point is that we're interacting with the world all the time. But because my mindset isn't aligned to learn, I think I already know something, I already am something, I accept the status quo, and I don't ask, what's the lesson? What am I meant to learn from this? That I miss the growth. I'm not able to take advantage of it. So if I'm preemptive in this, and the questions are so handy, you can carry them with you, and I notice myself, the urge to give in to victimhood or to not forgive somebody for my own sake is so strong that unless I have a tool and say, okay, what's the lesson here? Then I can just be carried away by the current. The last question, where am I investing my attention right now? I deliberately used the word invest, and I also coined this phrase ROA. We're mostly familiar with ROI, right? Which means return on investment. It means how much am I going to get in return financially. But Bhagavad Gita points out, in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna points out that because we're spiritual beings, we're conscious beings. Our consciousness is more powerful than we know. And wherever we place it, that's where we go. And whatever we contemplate, whatever we look at and consider deeply, especially if we're thinking, I'd like that to be mine, then that becomes attached to me. I have to carry it around with me everywhere I go. For instance, in the Gita, 2nd chapter, Krishna says, Dhyayato vishayan punsam sangasteshu bhajayate, which means that if you contemplate the objects of enjoyment in this world and you start thinking about them, then they attach themselves to you. And now you got to walk around with it stuck onto you. And if you get enough of those things, then you feel really, your life feels burdensome. In fact, it's going into our own consciousness. And it's one of the ways that the ancient wisdom literatures talk about why we feel disturbed. It's because we've taken in so many images in the world, and there's impressions within our minds and hearts that practically haunt us. There's a cacophony of sound vibrations in there that we've taken in, and urges that we've developed by our own device, which is looking at things and then considering that maybe I can take that, and then I become attached to it. So if I ask myself, where am I investing my attention right now, and I realize that there's a major consequence for what I look at and what I contemplate and where I dally. The Bhagavatam and other scriptures say, don't dally. Don't loiter. You know what loitering means? You really do? Can somebody look it up? Yeah. We have a research team ready to go. Do you have a microphone? Yeah, we know. Huh?
Which means hanging out in a place and doing nothing.
That's a perfect definition. Thank you. And let's hear where it comes from. Read what's in the dictionary. It'll match his for sure. And then we'll look at the history of it.
Loiter is to stand or wait around idly or without apparent purpose. And its origin is from Middle Dutch, from loiteren, wag about.
To lag about. Lag about.
Wag about.
So don't hang around and just look at stuff for no reason. It all goes in. I was reading in the Yoga Sutras, and there's a commentary in there that talks about how yogis are careful not to entangle themselves in the world. And it said that they're so aware of how the world can, and the way of contemplating it can be implicating in their lives, that it said they're as sensitive as an eyeball. They said, why an eyeball? Because the eyeball's so sensitive. And if you think of the soul, how sensitive we are, how subtle we are, when we get mixed up with the gross material energy, then there's a way in which it can really hurt. So the question at every second we can ask ourselves, especially when we feel overwhelmed with many different decisions we have to make and many options that we have, is where am I investing my attention right now? The Sri Upanishad says, Anyad evahur sambhavad. Anyadahur asambhavat. And iti shushrumadhiranam yenas tadvichakshire. This is a very simple equation. It says one result is obtained by placing your attention on sambhavat, which means on the Supreme, Krishna. And a different result is attained by putting your attention into something that's not supreme. Is that a big surprise? Anybody surprised by that? Well, for me, it's a helpful equation, as I think, if my mind and senses want to go somewhere, I want to put my attention on something that's not eternal, I may think, what's the return on my attention here? It's going to, like, there's a real difference between scrolling on the phone and reading the Bhagavad Gita. How about that, for a contrast? Do you like it or not?
Yes.
2 people liked it? Is there a difference between scrolling on your phone and reading Bhagavad Gita?
Yes.
Yeah, we can discern that. Only problem is mind may wander, senses may wander. Yoga means to bring your senses to the most purposeful place. It's not austere, actually. Oftentimes, for instance, just taking the example of the Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavad Gita's there, your phone's there. Who wins? The phone? It's a very strong pull, right? Yeah. But your mind may say, oh, don't look at that. It's just words on a page. It's boring. I want to see multitude of images and who knows what going by my eyes. Is this resonating?
Yes.
Okay, good. I want to make sure I'm not alone in the world, and in the world of distraction. So once I pick up the Bhagavad Gita and I start reading a few lines, I invest my attention in it, I suddenly feel not only satisfied, but I feel guided properly. I feel a sense of that now I know what to do. Not so much by looking at random images on the phone, right? You agree?
Yes.
I need a little, cheering section here. You got to help me out. Work with me. So this is the simple equation. Anyadevahur sambhavad means if you invest your intention in Krishna or things related to Krishna, then you're going to be happy. If you put it into useless places, you throw it away. Kind of like in diet. There's healthy food and there's junk food. Yes or no?
Yes.
How do you feel when you eat junk food?
Junk.
What is junk food? It's like processed. Actually, it's not called food. It's called food-like substance. That's what experts call it. I heard that. And they go, it's a food-like acid. It's the part that's in the middle of the supermarkets. They say shop on the outside, around the inside. Yeah, that's where all the vegetables are. And there's a difference between eating food-like substances and food that just came off the vine, right?
Yes.
And I mean, this is, I don't know, something 101. What is it, Rasanath? What 101? Common sense? Common sense 101 is a little redundant. And anyway, there's a way in which if I am a good steward of my attention and I study how important my intention is, how I should have less, importance not a good word, innocuous. I would say how consequential my attention is. Where attention goes, energy flows. I'm going to enter into whatever I put my attention on, and it's an investment. We only get a certain amount of time in this life, and wherever I invest my attention, that's going to determine the quality of my life. And oftentimes we may feel subjected to outside influences. For instance, we were at Times Square the other day. Any of you go down there? There's no distraction down there, right? Yeah, the whole world's like that. And it comes from outside and also comes from inside. Not in this book, for something else I'm writing, I found in some of my research on sound vibration this place in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where they, for years, have been recording music for musicians. And then, for a kind of a curiosity and a tourist attraction, they built another studio, which is a soundless studio. It's a chamber that has no sound. In fact, sound is measured in decibels, and this one has negative decibels. So when you walk in, you can't even hear your footfall. You can't hear your breathing, you can't hear anything. If you speak a word, you can't hear it either. And two of the research journalists that I read, who wrote articles about it, said, both of them said, it's the loudest place on earth. And most people can't stay in there more than about 10 minutes. Even though it costs $75 to go in, they freak out. They have auditory hallucinations. They hear sirens. They hear voices. They hear everything. We have sound and impressions coming at us from inside our own subtle body. It's so loud that you can't even stand it. And the way that we're tolerating is we distract ourselves from the outside. It's no wonder then that I feel a little out of balance or overwhelmed. So Bhagavad Gita is giving commonsensical information, which is, you are so powerful, and the way you direct your attention is so consequential. And if you can remember it and realign yourself with the best place where you can put your attention, then you'll be happy. And if you don't like what you're being subjected to, change the subject. It's remarkable how one little decision can set you on the right path. You sit down in an airplane nowadays and there's a screen in front of your face. Who thought of that? And not only that, they put the panel right where my elbow goes. So even though I turn the screen off, I look up a few minutes later, it's back on again. Because my elbow's hitting the button and it's going back on. And everyone's trying to get our attention in every direction, from inside, outside. So the great relief from being subjected to all that is to think of Krishna. Krishna says, simple solution, manmana bhavamat bhakto. Try to think of me. And then he teaches, here's yoga. Concentrate on the holy name. Oh, it's really hard. Yeah, it's hard because we're so distracted. There's so many loud voices coming from inside our own head, the chatter. You gotta out-chant your mind. I thought of that the other morning. I was chanting. I was thinking, my mind's chanting, but I'm going to chant better. I'm going to beat it this time. I'm going to out-chant my mind. And this is the key to success in life. So anyway, there are these 4 questions, and questions are the most powerful tool we have. They're kind of a technology. And if you ask the right questions and you integrate them into your way of life, then you'll find yourself realigning at every step, and you can have what I put as a subtitle, a pathway to what does it say?
Inner peace.
Inner peace. Yeah, it's a pathway to inner peace. I didn't read the book, by the way, I just wrote it. I said the other day when I was signing books, and I mess up people's names or whatever, and I would say the hardest part of writing a book is signing them. That's not really true, but I thought it was kind of funny. So let's see if you have any reflections or questions. Yes, Prabhu.
The question I have is, because we are such conditioned and we are so used to our phones, media, and all the things, even if, like, let's say after this class, these things are inspiring and we are thinking about it, very likely tomorrow the mundane things take over, and soon whatever you journal will also be forgotten. So what tips would you have to keep these 4 questions front and center, and what we learn from them actually take action on them?
Okay. Well, one thing is to read the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is Krishna speaking directly to us, and it's the way in which we can realign our intelligence so that we do ask the right questions. There's no book like it anywhere in the universe. Everybody loves Bhagavad Gita. When they read it, they're amazed how simple it is, but how profound it is. Only God can speak like that. And it's a guarantee. If you read Bhagavad Gita every day, even a little bit, then you'll be sane. And another guarantee, if you don't read Bhagavad Gita every day, you'll go insane. That's it. So it's a simple process, but if you do it, a lot of people say, I have Bhagavad Gita, but if you open it, there's a little cracking sound because it... I saw Pradyumna when I was walking out, and he's been, pushing me for years to learn Sanskrit. So I said, yeah, I'm studying with Vasudeva, but he knew I'd taken a long hiatus. He goes, and he looked at me, he goes, crack a book, and he walked into the restaurant. I'm taking that as a special instruction from above. Crack a book. So crack the Bhagavad Gita, that's the main thing. Crack the Bhagavad Gita. If you do that, everything, all the noise subsides and you feel peace immediately from reading Bhagavad Gita as it is. You feel transcendental intelligence. That's my advice. And if you can read, the more you read, the more you study it, the better you'll feel. And the more responsible you'll be. And the more people will think, how did you get so responsible and so dependable? It's like, just read Bhagavad Gita. That's really the only way to do it in this world, because everything else is bad. It has varied effects on us, but only Bhagavad Gita is the direct path to sanity. That's the name of my next book. Okay, now it's a book about questions, so you have to ask a few. Yes?
Hare Krishna, dear Lord.
Hare Krishna.
Glory to Srila Prabhupada. Please accept my humble obeisances and gratitude for another opportunity of your in-person association. Could you speak about the space between what is my purpose, these 4 questions, and financial survival in the material world? And from the point of rent, food, car, ability to support the temples, the Brahmins in the temples, accessibility to come to programs and see you, not affluence of clothing and vacation and material things. And I opened this book and what is my purpose? And I closed the book and sat with that question for quite a bit. And those 4 answers were be a wife to my husband, a mother to my children, a disciple to you and Guru Ma, and a devotee within the community. But it takes financial stability to be able to do those.
Yeah, thanks for the very practical question. And the first thing I noticed about your question is how the questions can be confronting. In fact, I always like to say, if you stand outside a baseball game with a clipboard and ask people what their life's purpose is, it might start a confrontation. So life has various components, and in a holistic process like Krishna consciousness, there's nothing impractical. Everything is to be dealt with in a way in which we can be in the world, live a life of wonder and exploration and happiness in Krishna consciousness, but we also have to figure out other ways in order to be stable enough to continue that in the best way we can. Prabhupada didn't, one of the things he said that I resonated with, as he writes in one of his purports, is to find out about how to have financial stability, you have to be inventive. He said that. And I've found that it's helpful to have a plan, because the ways of the world, especially if you're living close to civilization, are unrelenting in that way. And it's very helpful to know what's available and what you can do. So I lived as a brahmachari for 13 years. When I came out of the brahmachari ashram, I had no money. I have a witness here, I think, so she can, my wife here, cool. And I had no credit either. That's a big deal. And I was very inventive in figuring out how to get some facility in this world, and it just took one step at a time and made plans. I read up on what would be the best ways in which to get stable financially, and then we very step-by-step methodically worked on that with a vision that it was an important aspect of our lives, especially because we're householders and we didn't want to feel that we were dependent elsewhere. So to answer more succinctly, I would say get a good plan with somebody who has an idea about how to do that, how to get financial stability. And it's not outside the purview of a holistic approach to spiritual life. Because as Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, we have two aspects to our life. One is called vyavaharika, which means you have to deal with practical matters to the best of your ability. As an example, one of my godbrothers gives, if you go to a job interview and they ask you where you're from and you say you're from Goloka Vrindavan in the spiritual world, they won't give you the job. You have to cooperate with the ways of the world and the powers of the world to a certain degree in order to be able to sustain yourself. And then of course we have the other aspect of our life he calls paramartika, which is our ultimate goal. So when we ask ourselves, what is my purpose and what are my priorities, at different stages of our life, it's quite natural to have to attend to these things with vigor in order to sustain a lifetime of practice in Krishna consciousness. Yes, Prabhu?
Hare Krishna, appreciate the class. I wanted to ask, you mentioned something about forgiving others for your own benefit, and Muhammad Dāsa had written an article on it, and something I was wondering is, as devotees sometimes we get into little scuffles with each other, and at least I find it can be difficult to overcome, but it's easier because we're in an environment where you're kind of pushed to overcome that tendency to hold grudges. But what about grudges that we had from before we were devotees, where sometimes our reactions are so strong that it's hard for us to forgive? Do you have any practical tips on how to overcome long-held grudges, or even grudges from people that have passed away that we still harbor, that we came before we came into this practice?
Well, one thing is to read in the first canto of Bhagavatam, there's a section about Dharma, who had been beaten. He's in Dharma personified as a bull. And he had been beaten by a Kali, and he was injured. And when Parikshit Maharaj meets Dharma the bull and asks him, who's done this to you, he didn't want to name the culprit because he didn't want to become complicit. When I remember that, that's a very lofty philosophical point, extremely lofty. If you bring it up in ordinary context, you may be assailed by the audience, right? But this is a different kind of audience. But I find it extremely helpful in the way of readjusting, realigning what I hold on to and what I let go of. In other words, if I'm holding on to a grudge, and I always think of the word grudge to be some kind of little nasty little animal, like what are those things called? Badgers. Have you ever had a badger as a pet? Anybody? Have you ever seen a badger? Honey badgers are fierce. They have sharp teeth and claws. And just imagine if you were carrying one around under your arm all the time. It snarled at people, so you're supposed to drop them off at the forest edge and let them run free. But one of the ways to do that is, for me, is to put everything in context. If I look at the the longer vision of my life and think, what's the ultimate goal? And that's one of the reasons to start with, what's my purpose? I always felt it as a child. This is going somewhere, actually. Don't worry, I'm going to stop soon also. But there's a way in which, when I was a child, I used to ask, why do I have to go to school if I'm going to die anyway? Because my mom told me, she said, first you get straight A's, then you can complain about everything. That's no problem. But I really did feel like that. There was an existential angst that I wanted to solve. What is the purpose to all this? And if you look at the longer game, some of the ways in which we hold grudges can seem kind of petty. Have to rise up in an air balloon, get higher and higher and higher, and look down on your life as a continuum of many lifetimes. And you see, okay, well, maybe I did the same thing to somebody else. It's tattenu kampam, right? And we just have to embrace that. And also the idea that the way the world works is so subtle. It starts from the subtlest level. And if I engage in this process, it profanes my very existence as a soul, that I start accusing other people. And it gives us this full permission to just let it go completely. That's pretty good. To have somebody giving us advice regularly who says, you really can rise to a higher level and let it go, and we won't mind at all. In fact, you'll be considered a saintly person. The next question people ask, if you say it in a certain context, is, well, you know, I'm in the corporate world and people try to step on you all the time. Everyone wants to take advantage of you. And the world is a big competition for survival. Ahastani sahastanam aparani chatuspadam balguni tatra mahatam jivo jivasya jivanam. Bhagavatam says everyone's trying to eat everyone else so they can survive. And everyone's taking up my oxygen. You know, it's my place. But if we're able to rise high enough and look down, then it's almost like some of those medicines you use sometimes. You wonder how they're working so well. Whatever affliction you had, whatever rash you had, you put it on, it went away. And the higher perspective can be very helpful, and an awareness that I become complicit by holding on to it. And those arguments are very powerful, especially for a devotee. You can look at it and say, okay, I have permission, let me try it. This is what one of my friends always says too. Try it out for a day and see how you feel. Okay, the person, you know, took something from you or violated you in some way, so see how you feel for one day if you completely let it go. And then, if it's good, continue it. Otherwise, you can stay in the fray. Thank you for such an important question, and all of you. It was really helpful and insightful questions. And I've gone past the time. I believe it was 8 o'clock, and now it appears to be 8:10. In any case, for me, writing a book is really just about writing down the kind of conversations that I'm having with myself and with others, and it's really a conversation starter. I wrote the book in the kind of with a mood that I was offering it to those that I'm mostly talking to on a regular basis, who aren't acquainted yet with the Krishna consciousness. They don't have the perspective of the Bhagavad Gita. It's all new to them. But I try to put philosophical points that they could assimilate, and I tried to unpack all the language. I didn't assume that they knew anything about Krishna consciousness. So the main audience that I was looking for was people who I wanted to introduce Krishna consciousness to. So hopefully, I don't even like promoting my own book. It's kind of weird. It's not, but in any case, it's there, and what can I do now? So I really appreciate you asking about it and continuing the conversation, but the points are valid and real, and the Bhagavad Gita is real, and there are practical ways that we can take the lessons from Bhagavad Gita and enact them in our lives, and we'll live a better life. That's my ending statement. Om Tat Sat. Thank you very much, everybody. Hare Krishna.